Greetings. Well, yesterday's video about food production shortages in the 21st century, it sparked some questions, sparked some comments, so I have more to say on this subject now. And, you know, I'm sort of known as a plant explorer guy. People know that I grow some unusual things. And it is true, as a younger man, I was a very avid plant explorer. Yeah, anything I could find that I hadn't grown, I'd plant it and, see what happened. Well, you know, you do that over and over and over and over again. And finally, I drew the conclusion in life that there's really only two kinds of plants that I need around me. One, the type that I like to eat. And if I don't like to eat it, I have no use for it. Unless it's a plant that other people want and I can sell it to them. And so, plants that I like to eat and plants that other people want to buy that have commercial potential, these are the plants I'm interested in. Pretty much all the other plants on Earth are sort of, well, like they say in geology about rocks that you just don't want to bother to pick up. It's a leave her right there, and that's kind of the way I feel about most of the plants I encounter. I don't have any need for them. Yet I'm well aware, definitely well aware, that collecting plants, and I think particularly collecting exotic food plants, tropical fruit in particular, has become what appears to be more of an international, well, if I call it a fad, I'd insult someone. So let's see, movement. There we go. There's a lot of people out there that are really interested in doing this. Some of them I think are hedging on the fact that climate change is going to move the citrus belt north, or stuff like that. And there's some validity in all that too. Anyway, I'm well aware that this has become an international passion. People talk to me all the time about it, but whereas I think horticultural research, whether it be by professionals or amateurs, is a good thing. Yes, in the process of my collecting and experimenting, I did find a few crops that weren't well known to grow in the areas where I was planting them. Yeah, I had good results with certain varieties of bananas in the Bay Area of California. The macadamia nut was not well known to grow in the Bay Area of California, but it did very well for me there. And there was an experiment that I brought it in. Few of the more exotic subtropicals like white sapote thrive there. And again, they're not commonly grown. There's a few around, but you don't see them much. And so it was experimenting that, brought me to the conclusion, well, these things really do grow here. Well, in fact, even the pawpaw, it was known to grow in the Bay Area, but until I started raising it myself, it certainly wasn't very common. Because, man, did I have friends when I had pawpaw fruit. Everybody wanted to see and eat the fruit and pick the fruit, Well, eventually, I felt that my collecting became obsessive. Yes, yeah. And I had to do something about it. That happened when I had to move from one location to another in California, and it took me 3 18-foot U-Haul trucks to move the plant collection. Now, I was selling most of that stuff in the farmers markets, and so it had an economic purpose. But boy, I tell you, it was a real awakener. I said, I need to get this under control. Just growing everything because it's out there doesn't make sense. This is a load. And so I went through the 12-step program, as the Alcoholics Anonymous calls it, with plants. The plant 12-step. Because I was working in a nursery and I had taken over the job of ordering for the nursery, I was able to do a catharsis with my ordering cycles in the nursery, that every plant in the world that I ever wanted to see and have around, I could buy it on the market, put it in the nursery, and put it up for sale. I had a passion for Japanese maples, for instance. Oh, I used to keep up to 250 different types in stock. I didn't have to keep them. They weren't mine. I would sell them to other people. They were their problems, but I got to have them for a while, and that was, well, about all we ever get anyway, right? Yeah, none of us could take any of it with us anyhow, so it really satisfied the need, and it kind of wised me up too, because I had been playing with a lot of really unusual things. Some panned out. Most did not. What I found was that if I brought guavas or pineapple, white pineapple, back from Hawaii, well, here they achieve perfection. Our white pineapples here they're heaven sent. And Hawaii raises some of the better guavas on earth, if you like that sort of thing. But when I moved them to California, I managed to produce the guavas, and I managed to produce the pineapples. But none of them were up to the quality that I got when they were grown in an appropriate climate. You can force the climate, and I did use, hoop houses and other methods of extending growing seasons and protecting with plants and so on, only to find out that, even if I could fruit them, they weren't adapted to where they were at. It was that simple. Yet, a simple Fuji apple tree or a Camise pear, would produce fruit literally to die for in the same environment without having to have greenhouse shelters or anything to modify the climate. I still had to worry about pest problems, but there's no free lunch. But I didn't have to modify the climate, and it turned out that I think the soils and the climate in Fremont, California are probably the absolute finest place on earth to grow a Fuji apple. Yeah, I've never eaten a better one grown anywhere. All right? Well, you can push the envelope and try to grow white pineapples in Fremont, for instance, and you can do it. It can be done. I know it. But it ain't worth it. No, my opinion is that the foods that are perfectly adapted within the climate where you live into the soil types, those are the crops. Now, sometimes it takes research to figure out what that is, but, a halfway good pineapple never matches up to a perfect apple. That's just the way it is. Yeah. You can wish to have avocados in Tennessee, and you could probably do it if you want to put enough energy to it. But why bother? There's a whole lot of other things like pecans, for instance, that raise crazy good in the state of Tennessee. There's a lot of things that raise really, really well there and maybe reach their absolute perfection on Earth in that habitat and location. And it's not really whether you can do it or not, it's how good is it. This is food. And so the inevitable end to food is to be eaten. And if it tastes so-so, who cares, But if it tastes incredible, you can go back for more, and everybody else going to want more, and so on and so forth. And so, I get these people tell me all the time how I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Oh, I got things, 4 climate zones out of, out and so on that I'm successful with. Well, it's all good. I'm not sour on the whole idea by any means. Again, I've been there. This is my history too. But, logic dictates. Grow what you can sell and grow what tastes good in your environment. Grow what you like to eat that will develop where you're at. Every place I've ever been had something. Even in Alaska, if it was a spruce tree, but it had something that really grew well there. So, moving from there to our current situation on crop problems, the climate is changing around us. And well, for instance, grape growing in California, which has been a major industry due to wine. Grape growing is dependent on varietals. In other words, that if you have Bordeaux or Chablis, these are certain types of grapes. You really can't do anything to the grapes, so to speak. Genetically, they have to remain genetically the same type of grape to be able to call it Bordeaux. And all the money is in name varieties in bottle. Well, certain grapes grow right in certain climates, but don't grow well in others. Shortage of water, of course, is a severe problem because California grapes are grown with irrigation. But varietal is the other issue. As climate changes, the type of grape that the farmers are raising doesn't necessarily match the climate they're in anymore. It might be, 50 miles north across the Oregon border and not in Northern California anymore as everything changes. And so the quality of the wine they're producing for the grapes begins to decline, and it doesn't make the market standard. So basically, the product is grape juice. It's not worth making wine out of anymore. And this is a big problem because you can't just, pull grapes up and move them north. All right, a farmer can go about tearing everything out and replanting with new varieties, but wow, that cost is extreme, and the loss for years. Basically what that means is sell the farm now. Okay, that's really what it means. Now, if you're planting corn in Nebraska and your wells are going dry and you've been irrigating it, well, maybe sunflowers will grow without as much irrigation. Okay, maybe it's time to switch to wheat. Even that involves money because you have to, maybe change the machines you're using and stuff, and maybe where the stuff's being sold. It changes a lot of things, makes it complicated. It's not that easy, but when it is an annual crop that's being planted, from seeds or plants in a field, and then removed, changing what you're doing to match the climate is easier than when you have something like orchards or vineyards, or nut groves. These things now they become economic ruin. Cattle ranches, where the crop is the cow, but if there's no more grass, because it's dried out, you can't afford to be just constantly buying bales and throwing them at your cows if you have, thousands of head on thousands of acres, which is the way most cattle ranches work. The one next door over here, even on Hawaii, is 1,600 acres. They're not small operations. It takes a lot of grass to feed a cow. What I think I'm seeing is that during the Depression, the Great Dust Bowl, during the Dust Bowl in the central United States, where people evacuated and went west to California and other places looking for hope, lands were abandoned in many cases. There are still, to this day, there are entire towns in Prairie, Kansas, that are owned by one person, one family, and bought everything during the Great Depression and never let it go. You have a landlord for every house in town in some places. Yeah, it's like that. Well, we're seeing it again. Some of the mega rich, there are billionaires here, like Bill Gates for one. I believe Jeff Bezos too. Are investing in huge tracts of farmland, particularly cattle ranch land, where the ranchers are going under. But I'm just understanding that they're buying enormous tracts of farmland at this point. Now, what they have in mind, I don't know. America always needs food. The world always needs food, I suppose. They're just, smart guys with money. I don't think there's any master plan or conspiracy, but it is looking like the 1930s Dust Bowl on steroids. The Western drought is far worse than the one during the 1930s. 1930s was only foreshadowing for what was to come in our climate, kind of revving the engine up to go, okay, folks, look out, here I come. I fear that what it will mean is that many farmers will go under. Yeah, and That was the source of the Great Depression during the 1930s. Okay, during the 1920s, farmers were not getting enough for their agricultural goods. Most of them began to default on their loans, and the Great Depression did not start on the stock market, folks. That helped tie the knot. It started on the farm during the mid 1920s. Government didn't step in and do much anything about it. They just laissez-faire it, and it slid right through the stock market in 29, and then all the Okies headed to California. It's history. Farmers are always on the edge usually anyway. They aren't the ones that make the big profits most of the time on what they do. They're lucky if they can stay in business. The way it works. Most of them are mortgaged to the hilt. The banks own them, and you get one or two bad crop years and oops, it's done, Only so much support a government can give to these farmers, and at a point you face reality. You maybe can't raise that crop here anymore. And I think we're going to see a lot of that happening. And in some cases, it's going to mean the farms will be sold or the farms will be abandoned. So the amount of food being produced in the United States is going to go down. There's no way that can cause prices to go down. No, that means prices go up, supply goes down. Competition for certain items, too, will really drive prices up as some things become more and more hard to grow, hard to get. The price on those particular items is going to get driven up if it's desirable, So, to turn that one back around again, farmers are going to probably be having to make some heavy choices, not only in what type of crop they're raising, but in how they're raising the crops. The standard agricultural model as we see it today will most likely not survive the coming century. Western agriculture is reliant on water that's disappearing. Eastern agriculture is reliant on artificial fertilizers that keep going through the roof as the price of oil goes up, because that's what they're made out of, folks. So on and so forth. And even in the East, as we get tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and generally erratic weather, where flooding conditions will be interspersed with drought and back and forth. Maybe you can't get into the field in Illinois to plant the corn because it's raining like crazy. Then when you finally get in late, you put the corn in, and then all the rain stops and your corn droughts. And then after the crop is weakened due to drought throughout the growing season, then maybe fall sets in and torrential rains and storms come back in, so it's almost impossible to get into the field to harvest the corn. Yeah, and then again, that's with machines. Crops that are handled by hand, COVID's had a ding on that because we've had so many sick farm workers. And I don't think we're going to see disease disappearing here anytime soon, too. So that'll have another impact on it. These are all connected. Climate, lack of food, collapse of governments, diseases, they're all in one sphere together. One thing feeds the other. Everything's temporary as far as I'm concerned. Now, sometimes it's not temporary enough for me, because I'm temporary too. Definitely very temporary. That's what I always remember. Every time I look out the window in the morning and go, man, what's wrong with the world? Remember, Bill, you won't be here too long. I wish a lot of other people to remember that too, because they get so excited and worked up about stuff and create such a stinking mess when, around here nothing ever stays the same. Yeah, not long. Nothing ever stays the same. You get focused on something and you're sure, oh my goodness, and then before you even know it, the entire thing's diffused because something else happened to change that event. I don't know what the future is, but looking at the situation, it looks kind of dire. I don't see food prices coming down. And so, as farmers are going to have to worry about changing crops, right? And food prices are definitely going to go up, and they don't see how they're going to come down very much for quite a while. then that makes you home gardeners out there more important than you ever were. Yeah. Small is beautiful, people, and the large-scale problems we'll have on the farm are large-scale problems that will require big solutions. The small-scale growing that you do in your own yards only requires small solutions. It's much easier to work with conditions on a smaller level, as I had mentioned to folks out west in the last video about educating yourself on some of the traditional Pueblo style ideas of how crops were raised in the arid Southwest can really enhance your backyard production. But again, I am an advocate of selecting the crops to match the climate. Very much. Whatever you think you want to grow, you want to grow bananas in Maine, well, come on. But on the other hand, Maine and potatoes, I mean, they even have potatoes named after them, Kennebec, and so on. There are some crops in some areas that are just like literally killer. And I do believe in the coming situation that a smart gardener's focus will be what raises here with the least amount of input and produces the best quality. The heck with the things that you have to fight with, baby, nurse, and so on and so forth to get a yield out of them. Now, there are places where what I call space station gardening will be useful. Hydroponics, for instance, is definitely a water-conserving system, so that's going to help. It's a compact system that's good for some specialty crops. And so I believe certain specialty crops, like, say, for instance, organic tomatoes or something that you want to have in restaurants in downtown New York, they can be raised right in downtown New York using hydroponics. Hydroponics is a solution to creating more urbanized agriculture. So I think it fits there. On the other hand, I never tasted a piece of hydroponic produce that I thought was any better than stuff that was grown in the soil, and most of it is not as good. But if you can't get tomatoes out of the garden, if you can get them out of a hydroponic bucket in New York City, hey, makes for salads, I guess, right? So there's applications for all sorts of different possible ways that will change things coming up. And I do believe that urbanized agriculture, probably in a highly mechanized, maybe even completely technological, artificial LED lights and stuff, who knows, that there are technological solutions to be used in areas that are extremely technical, like urban spots. On the other hand, my belief is that plain old soil is always the cheapest place to grow a crop. And so if you want food that you can afford to eat, we're still going to be plowing dirt. And so in the home garden, my suggestion is to definitely focus on those crops that produce outstanding in your area. That's where most of your energy needs to be put, because maybe you're going to share it with the neighbors. It's definitely going to cut into your food bill. And crops that are perfect in your environment create perfect states of mind. Yeah, I mean, I go into meditative trances eating perfect apples grown under perfect conditions. There's all kinds of different stuff you can put in your mouth. Here in Hawaii, every now and then I get a papaya down that I go, oh man. Or occasionally I get a banana or a pineapple, and it's just, we get a few pineapples every year that in the center of the Garden of Eden, in an open meadow, at the beginning of time, there was once one single archetypical pineapple plant that was the source of all pineapples that ever came and was the most perfect fruit on earth. And occasionally we get one of those every year here. Yeah, Hawaii's pretty good for growing pineapples. On the other hand, Minnesota isn't. No, neither is Michigan or Illinois, And so in those environments, there are other crops. Raspberries were outstanding for me in Wisconsin, for instance. A marvelous crop. Asparagus. Oh, Wisconsin raises great asparagus. So would Michigan, for instance. Excellent crops there. You know, there are things that are perfect for your conditions. And with the way things are looking, I'm advocating that's the direction you want to go in, is find out what grows better than anything else in your environment and produce plenty of it. Focus on it, you know. Uh, Share it with the homeless shelters. Give it to your neighbors. Go to the farmer's market and make a few dollars, you know. Do whatever you may with it, but I think that the home gardeners are going to become increasingly more important in the 21st century. It only makes sense to me. I imagine the rest of you can visualize where I'm going with that, because we don't necessarily have to have huge mega farms feeding the planet when we find that very difficult to do. But we will need food production to continue no matter what. And the more different people producing the more crops, at whatever level. I mean, even the guy that produces 1 bushel of carrots, it's a contribution. The family will eat that bushel of carrots and will not have to go somewhere else looking for another bushel of carrots, you know? Okay, I think I said it all for now. Hang loose, people.